Hi everyone. Some interesting data has come to light about the sales and downloads of PlayStation's first-party games on Vita, and so I wanted to dive into them. This comes from the Insomniac leak last year, but it seems that this data wasn't published until now. First off, let's set the stage by understanding what we're looking at. This graphic, put together by @RealRadek on Twitter, ranks the top 30 first-party PS Vita games based solely on their digital sales revenue and download numbers on PSN. Remember, this doesn't include physical sales, so it's just one piece of the puzzle. Something that a person mentioned on Twitter, which I think is very valid, is that since Vita memory cards were so expensive and the sizes were quite small, it has likely held back digital sales of Vita games. So I expect the bigger percentage of sales to be physical games. Leading the pack is Killzone Mercenary, with over $7.2 million in revenue and nearly 330,000 downloads. This was a great game and showed that the Vita can handle graphically intense first-person shooters. It makes sense that it would be high up on the list, although I would have expected Uncharted Golden Abyss to have beaten it, given it was also a launch game. This indicates a lot of people bought Uncharted physically, but I think it's also because Uncharted and Gravity Rush were both PS Plus games from November 2012, so there would have been a big reduction in the number of download sales for both titles from that point, which may have allowed Killzone to overtake them. Sony had announced previously that Uncharted sold more than 1 million copies, so that gives us an idea that around 20% of sales were digital. It's hard to know if that applies to all games though, or just Uncharted. Soul Sacrifice is an interesting one too. Soul Sacrifice and Soul Sacrifice Delta, which was an expanded version of the first game, together sold more than Killzone. I think this was mainly because of the Japanese market, as they were big fans of the Monster Hunter series, and Soul Sacrifice was almost like a Monster Hunter style game, or that's how it is marketed at least. When Soul Sacrifice was released in Japan, it came out at the same time as a Vita price cut and a limited edition Vita model, which likely helped sales. Delta was download only in the West, which likely contributed to more digital sales too. Given how well Soul Sacrifice Delta sold, despite being digital only in the West, suggests it should have been released physically here too. Freedom Wars, which was another Monster Hunter style game, was 6th on the list, which seems respectable for me. Looking at digital only titles, the best sellers were Modstorm RC and Escape Plan. Interestingly, Modstorm RC was the best-selling game on the list in terms of number of downloads, but it was pretty cheap, so it didn't make as much revenue, only $3 million. I'm not sure Sony would have been happy with that, or if the game even made its money back. Given the Vita sold around 15 million units, that means the best-selling first-party digital game of Modstorm RC only reached 2.5% of the install base, which feels really low. Stardust was digital only and made nearly $2 million, but after that the revenue really drops, where Dead Nation, When Vikings Attack and Hustle Kings all made less than $1 million. Uncharted Fight for Fortune only made $300,000. As I said above, all of these games may have been held back by the high cost of Vita memory cards. Also interesting is the revenue per unit of games. With $7.2 million in revenue and 330,000 units sold, the average price for buying Killzone Mercenary is $22. A lot of people likely bought it while on sale, as the original price was $35. Uncharted's average price was $22.50, Gravity Rush $23, Soul Sacrifice Delta $22, Unit 13 $22. Freedom Wars was around $26, which shows more people bought it new on release. Freedom Wars came out after 64GB Vita cards were available, so people may have felt more comfortable buying big games for their memory cards. It's impressive that Unit 13, a brand new IP, sold better than Wipeout and Resistance. Unfortunately, this may partly explain why Studio Liverpool was closed soon after Wipeout 2048's launch, since the game didn't sell especially well, which is a real shame because it is a great game. I'm also impressed with the sales of Hot Shots Golf. It sold well in Japan when the Vita launched, and I guess that also translated to digital sales. A couple of games missing from the list are Flower and Sound Shapes. Both would have made the list, but the sales data includes PS4 or PS3 sales too, so we don't know the Vita sales numbers only for those games. You may be wondering, Little Big Planet is there twice because Sony released a second version with Marvel characters and levels. It seems like the Marvel one barely sold at all though. Looking at these numbers, and especially the results for the download-only games, I think it paints a bit of a picture of why Sony moved away from funding smaller games. I loved Fat Princess, Tokyo Jungle, Patapon, but we don't get these kinds of games from Sony anymore. The Vita may have been part of the reason for that, since the best-selling digital game wasn't even downloaded by 3% of owners. Sony said in the past that Vita owners buy games, and at one point they said it had a high attach rate of games per console unit sold. But these numbers don't really show that, so it may well be the Vita owners heavily supported physical purchases, which would make sense given the high price of the memory cards. The Vita also came out at a time when buying digital was less popular than it is today. It would be so interesting to see all the sales data, including physical, but we're unlikely to ever get that. It would also be interesting to see the sales numbers for titles like Persona 4 Golden and Call of Duty, and see how they compare to Sony's games. I think Call of Duty would have sold a lot more, but most third-party games would have sold less, which also explains why big third-party publishers dropped support for the Vita very quickly. We know Sony made mistakes with the Vita, particularly when it came to the memory cards, so it's a shame seeing some great games that didn't perform as well as I'd hoped when it came to digital sales. So guys, what are your thoughts on the sales data? Would you want to see similar videos analysing games sold for PSP and other Sony systems? Leave a comment below, and as always, thanks for watching.